It was a phrase so chilling, so final, that it seemed to echo long after the match had ended. "It's over!" Those two words, whispered through sobs, silenced the noise of the stadium and left the tennis world gasping for breath. ARYNA Sabalenka, the Belarusian powerhouse, a woman who had bulldozed through tournaments with fearless aggression, was now crumbling before millions of eyes. For those who watched, it wasn't simply a defeat. It was the collapse of a gladiator, the unraveling of a warrior who had long hidden her fragility behind booming serves and ferocious ground strokes. And as she fell to her knees, tears streaming, the question on everyone's lips was brutally simple. Had we just witnessed the end? The scoreboard, the statistics, even the opponent, they faded into insignificance. What mattered now was the sight of a champion laid bare. Long before the tears, before the haunting words, "It's over," there was a young girl gripping a racket too heavy for her small hands on the cracked courts of Minsk. ARYNA Sabalenka was not born into privilege or comfort. She was born into grit. Belarus in the 2000s offered little glamour, yet in that modest setting, something extraordinary was being forged. At just 10 years old, she was hitting balls against rusting fences with the fury of a player or twice her size. Coaches recall a teenager who would refuse to leave the court even as dusk fell, her shoes caked with dust, her arms trembling from repetition. Her father, a man whose dream was to see his daughter compete on the world stage, became the driving force behind her relentless practice. Every stroke, every drill was a pact between father and daughter. Nothing less than greatness would do. By the time she turned 14, whispers had begun to ripple through European junior tournaments. Who is this Belarusian girl crushing seasoned juniors with fearless aggression? She wasn't just winning. She was dismantling opponents, often roaring after points in a manner that unsettled rivals twice her age. Her professional debut at 17 confirmed the prophecy. The tennis world had seen prodigies before, but Sabalenka's brand of power was different. Raw, explosive, unapologetic. Within a year, she had claimed her first win over a top 50 player, a victory that electrified not only her homeland, but also tennis commentators who sensed a storm was brewing. By 2018, she had surged into the world's top 20, an astonishing ascent built on ferocity and self-belief. Yet even in those early years, there were signs of the emotional weight she carried. A missed forehand would draw a scream. A double fault would prompt her to glare skyward as though cursing fate itself. The fire that fueled her also threatened to consume her, but back then no one cared. All they saw was the rise of a star. Between 2021 and 2023, Sabalenka transformed from a promising talent into one of the sport's most feared forces. Her serve thundered like artillery, her forehand lashed across courts with venom, and her presence alone unsettled rivals. Titles began to flow, WTA crowns, then the ultimate breakthrough, her maiden Grand Slam. For some it was the Australian Open, for others the US Open. What mattered was the statement it made. Sabalenka wasn't just arriving, she was here to dominate. Fans adored her ferocity. She roared after every winner, clenched her fist with gladiatorial intensity, and carried herself like a woman unafraid of the spotlight. Commentators called her a tour de force. Opponents admitted that playing her felt like standing in front of a runaway train. She was not just winning matches. She was redefining what power in the women's game could look like. But in the midst of triumph, cracks began to surface. Her volatility, the slammed rackets, the tears mid-match, the curt press conferences, hinted at an inner battle. For every trophy lifted, there was a toll. The loneliness of travel, the constant scrutiny, the weight of expectation. And though the world saw a champion, Sabalenka herself sometimes saw only the shadows cast by her own success. For every blistering forehand that drew gasps from the crowd, there was another side to ARYNA Sabalenka, a side far less visible, but infinitely more fragile. Beneath the warrior's roar lived a young woman often at war with herself. Her emotional outbursts were not mere theater. They were windows into a soul weighed down by expectation. She had built a reputation as the powerhouse, yet the fire that drove her victories frequently left her teetering on the edge of collapse. During press conferences, the contrast was striking. On court, she was fearless, a lioness stalking her prey. Off court, in the quiet rooms where microphones probed too deeply, her voice sometimes cracked. She admitted, in rare moments of candor, that she felt the loneliness of the circuit more than most. Nights in unfamiliar hotels stretched endlessly. Victories were fleeting highs, quickly drowned by the demand to do it all again. Her team often whispered about the toll. The relentless schedule, the physical grind, the commercial obligations, even triumphs became traps. Each success raised the bar higher. Each nailed defeat felt like a betrayal, not just of fans, but of her father's dream, the memory of the man who had first put a racket in her hand. And yet she kept going. To outsiders, it was an act of bravery. To insiders, it was survival. Sabalenka was not merely battling opponents across the net. She was wrestling with fatigue, expectation, and the ever-present question of whether her body and mind could keep pace with her ambitions. The facade of invincibility was beginning to crack, and those who looked closely could already sense that the fire might one day burn her from within. The 2025 season began with the promise of more glory. Sabalenka stormed into semifinals and early tournaments, her power game still dazzling. On the surface, she appeared unshakable, but those who followed closely noticed subtle shifts. Her serve, once a weapon of destruction, grew oddly unreliable. Her stride between points lacked its usual snap. Post-match interviews became shorter, her smiles more forced, as if masking an invisible fatigue. Wimbledon offered both hope and alarm. She battled into the latter rounds, thrilling crowds with flashes of brilliance, yet her body betrayed her with heavy legs and labored breathing. 6 tournaments back-to-back left her drained, her nights consumed not with rest, but with media circuits and sponsor demands. Then came the confession that rippled across social media. My body's still here, but my head, it's asking for a break. It was the kind of message that athletes rarely share, but Sabalenka had never hidden her emotions. For fans, it was a warning flare. Their champion was running on fumes. For rivals, it was an opening. And for Sabalenka herself, it was the first public admission that the fire which had fueled her rise was now dangerously close to burning it out. The stage was set under blinding lights, the kind of theater Sabalenka usually relished. Yet from the very first serve, something was amiss. Her trademark first serve power, normally clicking at nearly 70% accuracy, dipped to a faltering 60. Opponents smelled vulnerability. Points she once finished with ruthless authority stretched into exhausting rallies. The crowd sensed it too. Every unforced error drew uneasy murmurs. Each missed return chipped away at her aura. The opening set dragged into a tiebreak. Sabalenka clawed, growled, fought, but each forehand felt heavier, her shoulders sagging between points. She lost narrowly, and the silence in her box was deafening. The second set offered a glimmer, an early break, a 3-1 lead, the old thunder echoing for brief, tantalizing moments. Then came the collapse. 5 consecutive games slipped through her fingers. Forehand sprayed wide, footwork lagged, her opponent cutting her apart with surgical precision. By the decider, it was no longer tennis. It was survival. At 4-4, clutching at her thigh between points, she grimaced through pain, physical or mental, perhaps both. Match point arrived like a cruel inevitability. The rally built, the crowd roared, until at last Sabalenka wound up for her signature shot, the forehand that had won her countless battles. This time the ball sailed wide. No roar followed, no clenched fist. Only silence, and then tears. She dropped to her knees, racket slipping from her hand, whispering the words that would echo far beyond the court. It's over. It wasn't just the end of a match, it was the collapse of a season, perhaps even a career, compressed into a single heartbreaking moment. The aftermath was immediate and raw. Social media erupted within minutes of the final forehand drifting wide. Thousands of messages flooded in. Heartbreak, empathy, disbelief. Fans described the sight of her shoulders slumping as if she had been carrying the entire season alone. That wasn't defeat, one tweet read. That was a soul collapsing. Experts were no less struck. A former Grand Slam champion remarked on live television, this wasn't about losing. This was exhaustion in its purest form. She pushed beyond her human limits, and her body simply called time. A well-known trainer added bluntly, 6 straight tournaments, no reset, no off-season break. Eventually, the body and mind rebel. Journalists, too, framed the moment as a crossroads. Was this the fall of a champion, or merely the pause before a rebirth? The discussion quickly transcended sport. It became a wider debate about burnout, about how tennis schedules grind even the strongest down to breaking point, about whether mental health in elite sport is still being treated as an afterthought. Meanwhile, the ripple effects spread across the rankings. Sabalenka's stumble meant fewer points gained, her world number 2 or 3 status suddenly under threat. Rivals like Swiatek, Goff, Jabeur, and Rybakina saw the landscape shift. the path to glory made fractionally clearer. But for many, the immediate question wasn't about rankings or seedings. It was about a woman who had bared her humanity in front of millions, and whether she would ever recover from it. In the days that followed, speculation swirled like a storm. Was its over the cry of a broken athlete announcing her farewell, or simply a human being surrendering to exhaustion in one devastating moment? The tennis world held its breath. Medical scans and a period of enforced rest seemed inevitable. Some whispered of a scaled-back return, fewer tournaments, a more measured schedule designed to preserve her mind and body. Others feared a darker possibility, that the toll had been too great, that the emotional scars would not heal, and that the sport might have seen Sabalenka's last true roar. The WTA, under scrutiny, spoke of new mental health initiatives and mandatory rest windows, though skeptics wondered whether it would amount to real change or empty promises. Her peers, rivals on court, but admirers off it, flooded her with messages. "Take care, ARYNA. The game needs you, but only if you're ready." Back home in Belarus, fans lit candles in squares, a gesture of solidarity more commonly reserved for national tragedies than sporting losses. Young players wore to cultivate her colors, copying her trademark fist pump in small local tournaments, desperate to believe their hero would rise again. For now, the future remains uncertain. Perhaps Sabalenka will return, rested, renewed, and stronger than ever. Perhaps this was her final service, a champion bowing out on her own terms. Either way, one truth lingers. On that night, under the harsh glare of the floodlights, ARYNA Sabalenka reminded the world that behind every trophy, every victory, and every roar lies a human heart, one that can break as suddenly and as brutally as any serve on the tour.